How do you know when a student understands something? So an example that I've given in other podcast episodes is when I used to teach in a K-8 district that I was working in. I was kind of like the mentor for the coding teachers in there. One of the conversations that we had one day was looking at different student projects. And so this was using Khan Academy's interactive coding platform, which made it so that students were using JavaScript to be able to create art and animation. One of the projects had students creating pizza. So it's like a visual depiction of pizza like on a plate or on a dinner table or whatever. Students could kind of be creative with this. And so they're creating the different shapes to represent the different toppings on the pizza, different slices, or maybe a full pie of pizza, whatever. Now, one of the examples that we looked at, it had this really detailed, there's like really neat depiction of what pizza might look like with code. In terms of like how it looked, it was like a standout compared to every single one of the other projects. Like if this project was a 10, all the other projects were like a 7. However, when we actually looked at the code, it was very clear just looking at the code that the student didn't understand loops, as well as didn't understand some of the shape commands, etc. So in terms of the overall product, it was phenomenal. But in terms of like the demonstration of understanding, it actually demonstrated they didn't understand what they were doing, and they kind of happened to have some happy accidents that made a really interesting looking project that didn't actually demonstrate that they knew what they were doing. So it's important for researchers and for educators to really think through how you're actually going to check for understanding. Are you just going to look at the end result? Are you going to look at the process that they took to get that end result? Are you going to look at the final code? Are you going to actually ask them, even if their code looks great, and you look at it and you're like, there's no flaws here, like this is very efficient and effective use of code, it looks great, but do they understand it? If you sit down with a student and you say, can you explain to me what this function does? Can they do that? But to argue with myself, does being able to demonstrate something tacitly have more or less value than be able to explain how to do that very thing? Now, this is something that I talked about in episode 89, which is titled Applications of Affinity Space Characteristics in Computer Science Education. And I've related it to musicians. So do you want to be able to have it so that a musician can play a solo or be able to explain how to play the solo? Which one are you valuing or assessing for? Same thing with coding. Do you want to see that students can be able to actually create the thing or finish an app or a program or whatever, or be able to explain how to do that? Where along the continuum between the application of understanding and explanation of understanding do you want them to lie? Are they going to be somewhere right in the middle where they can do both, or is it going to be leaning towards one or the other? Depending on how you answer this is going to kind of depend on what kind of assessment you end up using, which I talked about in many other assessment-related episodes that I'll link to in the show notes. This excerpt of the CSK8 podcast was from episode 185, which is titled Mind the Gap, the Illusion of Skill Acquisition in Computational Thinking.